So, wow, we've just heard three magnificent presentations that I think illustrate that there's a veritable revolution underway, thank you, in our universities with respect to science and education. Really transformative, big things where scientists are stepping up and making, stepping up to the moment and making amazing things happen. So thank you very much. Marianne, I included you in this session, but your talk and Ben's and Tina's really, really magnificent. I have the pleasure of doing a chair's perspective, and I've entitled this A Virtuous Cycle of Knowledge and Action. Not just knowledge to action, but knowledge and action, because they need to go in both directions. And if I could have the slides, please. As I noted when I opened this session, although I work in the White House, I'm not speaking for the White House in this summit. And I say that because I'm going to be talking about some of the new things that are happening in federal government science to be a nice counterpart to what we've just heard in university science. So this session is supposed to focus on the role of sciences in reducing climate risk and enhancing climate resilience. Reflecting back on this just incredible week, we've heard fabulous successes that are truly inspiring. We aspire to make those successes contagious. They show us what is possible. Of course, we recognize that many of those successes benefited from a firm foundation of science and knowledge. For example, we began the summit with a focus on the IPCC. So we know that science has helped make those successes possible. Now, of course, the impressive achievements that we've seen and heard about required much more than good science. Clearly, science is necessary, but not sufficient. We heard from national and subnational leaders. They highlighted the importance of science, but also political will, grit, good policies, the right entry points, smart regulations, the right incentives, courageous leadership, effective partnerships, sustained and adequate financing and investment, and community engagement. Those were just cutting across all the different things that we heard. These keys to successful action will certainly inform the acceleration of action that is urgently needed. But as we look to implement the protocol and catalyze a chain reaction of more successes, we must also examine what is needed from science and scientists to continue to deliver the knowledge, the products, the solutions, and enable a continuous, virtuous cycle of knowledge and action. Following President von Braun's quoting of Kant's 3 questions of reason, I pose 3 questions of resilience science. 1, what do decision makers, leaders, and citizens, because decisions are made at multiple levels, what do decision makers need? 2, how might scientists share what we know more effectively, more rapidly? 3, what could we know that would make the biggest differences? And I suggest that we proceed on 3 interconnected tracks at the same time, simultaneously. One is to make better use of existing knowledge. So there's a lot of knowledge that we have that we don't use. It's not known, it's not accessible, it's not understandable, it's not seen as being relevant. 2, prioritize the search for new discoveries that, if known, could make the biggest differences. And I think Ben's farming to reduce CO2 emissions is a prime example, but there are others. 3, support basic science to uncover knowledge that we didn't even know we needed. So the third is familiar to the audience, so I want to go into more detail on the first 2. First, make better use of existing knowledge. There's a lot that we know that hasn't been converted into useful, usable information and tools to inform policy. For example, Many of the global and national level information that's available, like projections of temperature and precipitation, aren't very useful at the local level. Information needs to be scale relevant. Farmers, mayors, fishers, whoever needs information that's relevant to their world, and oftentimes that is simply not available. Recognizing the need for better and useful information to plan, many scientists and governments and elsewhere are developing the new tools to deliver what the users are telling us they need, scale-relevant information. And what I'd like to do is give you a few examples of activities underway led by federal scientists in the US. One is to translate knowledge and data into useful, what we call climate services. Climate services are data, information, products, tools that take the information and make it accessible and relevant for particular decision making at the spatial scale that is relevant to the decision making. So, first example is to downscale climate information to the local scale. You can't go online, for the most part, and get the kind of climate information you might want if you are a city planner, for example. City planners need better information about the size of the culverts that they need in building out their cities and retrofitting or building new places for people to live, new communities, the size of the culverts that they need to accommodate expected increases in precipitation so they can avoid flooding when their systems are overwhelmed. Two, emergency managers and public health departments need information about expected increases in temperature to anticipate and prepare for extreme heat. So just two quick examples. Secondly, regularly measure and report greenhouse gases. At present, governments rely on estimates of greenhouse gases produced based on activities. What we need are actual measurements of greenhouse gases in parallel to that. These measurements are central for two reasons. One, we need to know how well we're doing. Are we achieving our target? Are we ahead? Are we behind? And two, to help us see where we can move faster. Measurements of various greenhouse gases can be made from a variety of platforms, from ground-based platforms, planes, satellites, a whole bunch of different platforms. Greenhouse gas MMRV, measurement, monitoring, reporting, and verification, is needed to both evaluate and accelerate reductions of emissions and to track removals of carbon. Ben's removal of carbon from the air, we need to track that and be able to measure, is that actually doing what he says it's doing? We need to know. These and other climate services need to be easy to find. You shouldn't have to know which agency to go to find them. Easy to use, they need to be relevant to decision making. The second major area where we can make use of existing information is to align policies with knowledge. There is a wealth of information that scientists know that is not captured in our policies. And I'm going to describe two quick examples, one with climate, one with biodiversity. So the first one with climate, I call this the 4+ framing for climate resilience. The focus of most climate action is on mitigation, which usually means emission reduction, technology, and what we do on land. And I'm suggesting that we also need adaptation, mitigation plus adaptation. That's fairly commonly understood by this audience, but it's not often, it was late to the table. We have created a resilience framework within the federal government, and that's an example. In addition to emission reduction, though, we need carbon removal. And we need to understand that emission reduction isn't going to get us there. We are going to have to remove carbon from the atmosphere. We have in place, Ben just described an example of terrestrial carbon dioxide removal. We have underway activities that are identifying opportunities for carbon dioxide removal from the ocean. Third, technology is common. We talk about innovation. People usually think just technology. We also have nature-based solutions, which has come up over and over and over, but isn't part of our mindset in terms of taxonomy. And nature-based solutions, we created a roadmap to identify what are the impediments to achieving nature-based solutions? How do we remove those impediments? And those are a whole suite of activities. Land-based, and let's not forget the ocean. Thank you to an earlier speaker who called out the role of the ocean, the important role of the ocean. In truth, when we produced our Ocean Climate Action Plan, it became obvious to us that there is no path to reach our climate goals without the ocean. We need to look to the ocean for wind energy, offshore wind energy, for green shipping, for protection of blue carbon ecosystems, all of which are key to this success. So that's a quick suggestion of knowledge that needs, so the knowledge from scientists is that we need these plus, this is the 4+ framing. So it's not just enough to do the ones on the left-hand column. We have to do mitigation plus adaptation, emission reduction plus carbon removal, et cetera. Shifting now to biodiversity, my second example. We know that there is a significant loss of biodiversity. We know that our current policies and practices are grossly insufficient to stem the loss of biodiversity. And we know that loss of biodiversity undermines resilience in multiple ways and has huge equity consequences as well. Scientists know and understand many of the drivers of the loss of biodiversity, but policymakers haven't, by and large, incorporated that knowledge into policies and practices. So it's a huge opportunity to achieve our resilience aspiration. Now, to be sure, countries have rallied around the target of protecting 30% of lands and waters by 2030 in protected areas around the world through the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework of the Convention on Biological Diversity. And although we are nowhere near being on target to achieve the 30 by 30 goal, current efforts focus too much on the quantity of protected areas, the total area that's designated, and not on the quality of those areas, whether the protection is really effective. How well protected areas actually protect biodiversity. So to be clear, both quality and quantity are important. Moreover, in achieving even the 30% target, that will be insufficient unless we pay attention to the other 70% of the planet. We need a 100% approach, 30% in protected areas, 70% used sustainably. And to do that requires addressing the underlying drivers of loss of biodiversity. That requires connecting the dots between biodiversity and health, both mental and physical, biodiversity and national security, biodiversity and equity, biodiversity and climate change, biodiversity and the economy. Those connections are understood. We don't fold that into our policies. In the US, we've recently initiated a number of programs to do just that, and here are 4 quick ones. One, we are putting nature on the economic balance sheet of the country by creating natural capital accounts that are compatible with our other economic indicators. Right now, if you want to know how the economy is doing, you look at GDP, jobs, inflation. There's no mention of how nature is doing, and yet we know that the economy is based very strongly on biodiversity, on nature. Nature is absent. We need to address that. 2, in parallel to that, we are systematically removing some of the big impediments to embracing nature-based solutions. For example, we have changed the way the federal government calculates benefit-cost analysis. Yes, thank you, Michael. Yay. Super important and incredibly nerdy. This is deeply nerdy, but it's so important. So we have done it in a way that the economic benefit of ecosystem services is incorporated into the decision. And so the benefit cost analysis isn't just weighted in one direction, it's a balanced assessment. Thirdly, we have introduced the concept of natural security into the national security, the defense, the intelligence communities. For example, for the first time ever, the U.S. National Security Strategy uses the term natural security. Natural security. And there are active discussions underway about how to recognize the impacts not only of climate change, which the defense community understands now, but also the loss of biodiversity, on civil unrest, on migration, et cetera. And number 4, we have initiated our first ever national nature assessment to take stock, track, communicate the status, trends, importance, and options for action for our biodiversity. In addition to making better use of existing knowledge, which I just touched on, it's important that we prioritize the search for new discoveries that would make the biggest difference. And Ben has already mentioned CDR, carbon dioxide removal. My one example was marine CDR, so I will focus on that. In addition to that, we need to support basic science to uncover knowledge that we didn't even know we needed. So this is not saying we just need practical science, we need also basic science. So with those thoughts, I'll return to where I started. As we look to implement the protocol and catalyze a chain reaction of more successes, we must also consider what is needed from science and scientists to deliver knowledge, products, solutions, and enable this continuous virtuous cycle of knowledge and action. Now, you'll note that this framing requires that scientists listen to society and be responsive to societal needs in addition to pursuing their own ideas about what basic science should look like. So to sum up, here are my four conclusions. Apologies for a very wordy slide. One, scientists are rising to the occasion. This is a revolution that is underway. Folks are motivated because there are problems and they want to be part of the solution. They're listening to societal needs and delivering useful and usable information at international, national, subnational scales in new ways. They are moving beyond merely diagnosing the problem to also helping craft solutions and provide useful tools, products, data, and information to inform action. 2, to help deliver on climate resilience, scientists are helping expand the understanding of what it will take for climate action to succeed. They're shining a spotlight on this new 4+ framing: mitigation plus adaptation, emission reduction plus carbon removal, technology plus nature, land plus ocean. 3, although this summit and the protocol begin with the overarching framing of interconnected triple crises of climate, biodiversity, and loss, and inequity and inequality, in truth, most of our focus has been on climate. To really achieve resilient people, economies, and communities, science tells us we must simultaneously address the biodiversity crises and the equity crises. Doing so together is more efficient and brings rich synergies and co-benefits, but that's not going to happen without intent. 4, key elements of a strategy to address the loss of biodiversity will include: 1, more effective protected areas; 2, sustainable use of areas outside those protected areas, the other 70%; 3, putting nature on economic balance sheets; 4, reforming benefit cost analyses to be balanced; 5, valuing ecosystem services; 6, elevating the concept of natural security; and 7, connecting the dots between nature and human health. Apologies for the long list of things to do, but it's exciting horizon. This session is really focused on the role of science, and it's clear from the talks that science is really stepping up. It's such an exciting time to be embracing the challenges that this summit has put before us and to helping to ensure that the amazing successes we have seen today can be elevated, amplified, accelerated, and new ones will come along as well. I've identified a number of ways that science is needed to guide action and help craft solutions. And I thank you for your attention.